It's the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Presented by Climate Power Education Fund. Does big oil care about our streets flooding or our home burning? Not according to an ExxonMobil top lobbyist.
Did we aggressively fight against some of the science? Yes. We were looking out for our shareholders.
They care about profits, not people. Learn more at polluters.exposed.
You are Locked On Orioles, your daily Baltimore Orioles podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey there, Orioles fans. Today is Friday, August 13th, 2021, and welcome back in to the Locked On Orioles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I'm your host, Connor Newcomb, and today we get to the breaking news of the week for the Orioles. Chris Davis on Thursday morning announcing his retirement from professional baseball. We are going to have the full reaction here on today's podcast. Paul Valley is going to join us once again here on the pod. He is the host of the Bat Around, which covers all things Orioles on Saturday mornings over at Pressbox, and he comes on the pod to talk about the fallout from retirement. The Orioles getting an open roster spot, the money that this may save, where Chris Davis and when Chris Davis is going to get the rest of his contract. Then we talk about really his legacy in an Oriole uniform, and we also get to our favorite Chris Davis moments with the Orioles. That's all coming up a little later, but first we will recap another Orioles loss as they fall 6-4 to the Tigers on Thursday afternoon. They are swept by Detroit and have now lost 8 games in a row. But that's all coming up on this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast, which is brought to you by Spotify Green Room. Download the app and join me every week to talk Orioles and get in on the action at Spotify Green Room, changing the way we talk sports. So before we get to the whole Chris Davis breakdown, do want to get you a recap and the 5 things you need to know from the Orioles' 6-4 loss to the Detroit Tigers at Camden Yards on Thursday afternoon. It was a game that completed the 3-game sweep for the Tigers, and it makes it 8 losses in a row for the O's, who were playing really good baseball in the second half up until this losing streak, and the Orioles are now 38-75 on the season. And the first thing you need to know from the Orioles' 6-4 loss is that this may have been the worst start of the season for John Means. He lasts only 4 1/3 in this one, allowing a season-high 6 runs on 8 hits. He strikes out 3, walks 1, and allows a career-high 3 home runs in the game, throwing 79 pitches and his ERA up to 3.21 on the season. Really, the weird part about this start for Means is that it's not like he was perfect through 3 innings, but he had a pretty easy first 3 innings. Kept the Tigers scoreless through 3. It looked pretty simple. He came out there in the 4th. He walked the leadoff batter, and he gave up an RBI double after getting an out. He gave up a couple of 2-run homers, and all of a sudden you looked up, it was a 5 spot in the 4th inning for Detroit, as Renato Nunez got him for a 2-run homer, and then Victor Reyes got him for a 2-run homer. And the inning and the game changed just like that. I mean, it was the worst inning, really, of the year for John Means. The only inning that compares is the start where he allowed 3 runs and only got 2 outs in the first inning and left with the injury that kept him out for, a month or 2 of the season. So, it was not good from John Means on Thursday afternoon, and it was just weird to see things kind of flip like that, because usually when Means is getting hit around, you kind of see it early, but he looked good. It was pretty easy through those first 3 scoreless innings, and then something just went away from Means, and he just did not have it. He went with the fastball 48% of the time on the day, and, it was pretty good in the zone. He got 3 whiffs on it. He got 4 whiffs on the changeup. He only threw 1 slider. Again, he's kind of gone away from the slider, just kind of a fastball, changeup, curveball guy. And, the curveball was pretty good. The other pitches weren't terrible, but he was just getting barreled up. And kind of the weird part, too, especially about that 4th inning, is like the Victor Reyes home run that he hit off the pole for a 2-run shot down the left field line. That ball was in off the plate. That's a ball if he doesn't swing at it, and he takes it out for a 2-run shot. Even the RBI double that started the scoring, was a good pitch, and they took it down the line. So maybe he just got a little unlucky. That's all I can really take away from this. I mean, he did have 8 whiffs and 79 pitches, which isn't good, but it's not bad by any sense. And so maybe, hopefully, this is just kind of a blip on the radar, kind of a weird inning. He did come back out in the 5th and give up a leadoff solo home run to Robbie Grossman. He also gave up a 1-out triple to Candelario. The bullpen did a nice job of keeping that runner at third, making it only the 6 runs. But hopefully just a blip on the radar for John Means. And the second thing you need to know from the game, well, that has to do with the bullpen, which kept things scoreless for the rest of the game and kept the Orioles in it. 4 pitchers out of the Orioles bullpen combined to go 4 2/3 innings of scoreless baseball, allowing just 2 hits in that time. They walked 2. Now, they only struck out 2. It's not like they were super dominant, but they put up the zeros. It started with Marcos Duplan, who came in with a runner on third and 1 out in the 5th, kept him right there. He goes an inning and 2/3 scoreless. He is still yet to allow a hit, and he allowed his only base runner of his major league career with a walk to the first batter he faced, but after that, he just locked back in. I mean, he has been pretty much incredible. He has retired now at this point 16 of the 17 batters he has faced in his major league career. Pretty impressive. Then you saw Tanner Scott return off the injured list, and he didn't get a strikeout, but he threw a 1-2-3 7th inning when the Orioles needed it to keep the game close, and you will take that from Scott again. He had no idea where the ball was going in his final really 3 appearances before he went on the injured list. He threw 15 pitches, went with 9 sliders, 6 fastballs, I should say. You could tell he had the feel for that slider a lot better. And let's be honest, it's not like he was getting a lot of swings and misses. He only got 1 whiff out of 15 pitches, but he got some contact that worked for him, and he got a lot of soft contact in the inning, and that is what really helped him out. He only had one whiff and 4 called strikes on the day, but, he was able to get them to put the ball in play when it mattered, and that obviously helped him get out of that 1-2-3 inning. Then the Orioles turned it over to Cole Sulser, who wasn't as sharp. He did allow 2 hits in the inning, but got a big double play to put up a 0 in the 8th. And then Tyler Wells also made his return from the injured list. He was activated off the IL with the forearm strain before Thursday's game, and he pitched pretty well. A scoreless 9th inning, no hits. He did walk a batter, but he struck a guy out as well and was a welcome addition to the Orioles bullpen. So the O's bullpen, which has been giving up a lot of runs lately, they were not the problem in this 8th iteration of the losing streak. Third thing you need to know from the Orioles loss is DJ Stewart doing it again? Stewart in the game, 2 for 4 with 2 solo home runs, make it 3 home runs in his last 2 games as he also went deep on Wednesday night. He had 3 hard hit balls on the day. Both solo shots were pretty good swings on the ball. First one hit off the back fencing in right center field, just missed getting it onto Utah Street. Second one, he went the other way on a pitch up and away and took it out of the ballpark to left center field. And we know the stretch he had, that 10-day to 2-week stretch he had during the 2020 season where he hit, 7 or 8 home runs and looked like Barry Bonds. And it was coming off of us being like, DJ Stewart can't hit. Well, DJ Stewart's average had dropped below 200 at this point in the season. He had gone, on an 0 for 15 that he snapped with a home run. Is he getting together one of those streaks to basically keep himself on the roster? Honestly, you would love to see it because the Orioles need that production from the lineup, and you want to see DJ Stewart succeed if he is going to be on the Orioles. Fourth thing you need to know from the game is that Cedric Mullins is doing all he can. 3 for 5 for Cedric, 3 singles on the day, and a run scored from the leadoff spot. He had 4 hard hit balls in this game, ups his average to 322, his OPS to 936. He also stole home in this ball game as the Orioles kind of threw off the Tigers' defense in the first inning to get on the board against starter Matt Manning. He's doing it all. He's not getting a lot of help from his teammates, but he's trying to do it all himself at times, and we'll see if it can continue to work out for Cedric Mullins and hopefully work out a little better for the Orioles as a team. And the fifth and final thing you need to know from the Orioles 6-4 loss to the Tigers is that Anthony Santander is human, it seems. He had an 0 for 3 in the game. He was hit by a pitch to lead off the 8th inning, trying to start a rally there. That was his one time on base, but was an 0 for 3. No strikeouts on the day. He did have one hard hit ball, but he hit into a double play in a big spot. And no, he had been hitting about 480 in August. This was his first 0 for of the month. He is human, but hopefully he can keep the hot streak going in tonight's game. But that's what you need to know. Orioles fall 6-4 to the Tigers, are swept by Detroit, have now lost 8 in a row. Hopefully tonight against the Red Sox, they can stop that streak, but we'll talk about that briefly a little bit later at the end of the pod. But for now, we got to get to the big news. Once again, Chris Davis on Thursday morning announcing his retirement from baseball. Of course, he had one more full season left on the 7-year contract he signed after the 2015 campaign. Would have been signed through 2022, but multiple factors, including the hip surgery he got a couple months ago and just his hip in general, made him realize that his baseball career was done at this point, informed the Orioles, worked out some stuff with the financials with them, and they announced the retirement on Thursday morning. And here we are going to be joined by Paul Valley. He is the host of The Bat Around, the show that covers the Orioles every Saturday morning over at Pressbox. Paul has been on this podcast a couple of times before, and he joins us once again. We talk about the career of Chris Davis, how he'll be remembered as an Oriole, the great years versus the really, really bad years. We talk about some of our favorite moments. We break down kind of the financials of this deal and how the Orioles are deferring some of the Davis money. And we just talk about kind of our shock and how we reacted to the news on Thursday morning. So again, it's coming up with Paul Valley of The Bat Around. We talk about the breaking news of the week as Chris Davis has decided to retire from baseball. It's all coming up after the break. So we will get to talking about the retirement of Chris Davis in just a second, but first got to tell you about Built Bar and all of their delicious flavors of protein bars, like Cherry Barcia, Double Chocolate, Orange, Cookies and Cream, and many, many more. Now, it seems pretty intimidating when you go on the website sometimes because there's so many flavors, but here's how you fix that. You go to BuiltBar.com, you order a mixed box. They will send you 2 of each of the 9 flavors, then you can try them all and pick your favorite. But the best part is, not only are Built Bar flavors the best tasting, but they're healthy too. Most of the bars have 17 to 18 grams of protein, calories ranging from just 130 to 180, and only about 4 or 5 grams of sugar and net carbs. And Built Bar is the official protein bar of the U.S. track and field team and all the medals they brought home from Tokyo. So go to BuiltBar.com and use the promo code LOCKEDON and you'll get 15% off your first order. Again, that is promo code LOCKEDON for 15% off at BuiltBar.com.
David Harrison here, the Locked On Washington Football Team podcast, celebrating with you a 21 grain salute to a less boring sandwich thanks to Dave's Killer Bread. I don't know about you guys, but when I eat pizza, I eat it for the toppings, not the crust. And when I eat a sandwich, it's for what's inside the bread, not for the bread. But when I throw a sandwich on 21 whole grains and seeds, thin sliced bread from Dave's Killer Bread, it is the epitome of addition by subtraction. That thin sliced bread lets me focus on what's inside the sandwich, but also adds to the sandwich with killer taste, killer texture, killer nutrition, a subtle sweetness, and a seed-coated crust. Dave's Killer Bread is America's #1 organic bread for a reason. It tastes so stinking good. Dave's Killer Bread is made with the highest quality organic and non-GMO ingredients and is power-packed with whole grains, fiber, and protein. Visit daveskillerbread.com to learn more and look for Dave's Killer Bread in the bread aisle of your local grocery store.
All right, so we welcome Paul Valley back into the podcast. He is the host of The Bat Around on Saturday mornings over at Pressbox Online. And Paul, first of all, thank you so much on short notice here for jumping on the podcast with me.
Yeah, man, I'm happy to do it. Thanks for thinking of me and for having me on your podcast. I appreciate it.
Yeah, and so you're obviously here to talk about the big breaking news from Thursday morning, and that is Chris Davis announcing his retirement from baseball with just over a year left on that contract. He was signed through the 2022 season with the Orioles when he signed the 7-year, $161 million deal before the 2016 season. And before we get into more specific stuff, just wanted to ask, this kind of came out at a weird time on a Thursday morning before the Orioles play a day game. And, he hasn't been around the team all season basically, and kind of comes in the middle of the year. What was your initial reaction to seeing the news?
A little bit of shock, to be perfectly honest with you. So I worked at the station late last night. I didn't get home till about almost 1 a.m. So I was still in bed. Just kind of going through my phone. I got the text message saying Chris Davis announces his retirement. And I didn't see it coming. Like I just said to you right before we came on, I expected him to rehab and come back next spring and give it a shot. And then potentially the Orioles would say, this just isn't going to fly, and then DFA him. I had no idea that he would actually retire before the contract ended, because if he was going to retire before the contract ended, why didn't you do it last year or the year before when he clearly showed that he can't hack it in the majors anymore?
Yeah, I had a similar reaction. I kind of started to think about this because of the reasons why he was out. And, they called it a back injury in spring training. And then all of a sudden it was a hip injury, which he got the surgery on when they officially announced that he was out for the season. And so because those, obviously seemed like two different things that were ailing him, I did think, hey, maybe it's bad enough where he just hangs it up in the off season. But I did find it interesting to do it kind of here in August. And you could tell, obviously, and from reports that it wasn't just Chris Davis waking up and calling the Orioles this morning. Like there had been talks probably for the last week or two about the negotiations on the contract and all that stuff, which we'll get into a little bit. But it was definitely interesting to just see it happen now. And maybe, he got some sort of news on that hip in the last couple of weeks that really, put into doubt if he could really ever play again. And that kind of became, the final straw for him. And obviously, I think most Orioles fans believe that he probably wouldn't play again for the Orioles, whether or not he tried to, give it one more go in spring training next year. But, it was interesting because we've obviously seen a lot of negative backlash about the entire Chris Davis situation since he signed the contract. But I kind of felt like, and I don't know what you saw and what you overall felt. I overall felt it was kind of a more positive reaction than I thought I would see from Orioles fans when this day finally came.
Well, yeah, Orioles fans, I like to believe, for the most part, are smart. You know what I mean? And they understand what Chris Davis meant to this team from the time he got here at the trade deadline in 2011 through the 2016 season, where even though the average wasn't what you would want it to be, 38 home runs that year. He was a huge piece of that core that they always talked about that got the Orioles to win more games than any team in the American League for 5 straight years, got them to 3 playoff appearances in those 5 seasons. And I think when people look back on Chris Davis, of course, you're always going to remember how bad he actually was 2017 through 2020. But that doesn't negate what he did those previous 5 seasons. It doesn't take away those accomplishments. And for the most part, people look at that and they remember that. And without Chris Davis, the Orioles, maybe not 2014 because he hit like 196, but without Chris Davis, the Orioles don't make the playoffs 3 times in 5 years. And you can debate that all you want, but in my mind, that's just a simple fact.
Yeah. And people bring that up a lot. Like, the best team that Chris Davis was on was, probably his worst season while he was still considered a good player, which was 2014. But he did still hit 26 bombs that year. He still
missed a month.
Right. Missed a month, still got on base at over 300 clip, despite hitting under 200. So he was still doing things well. And I tweeted out the clip today of the pinch hit walk-off homer he had against the White Sox when he got relegated to the bench for a while there that season. Yeah.
And was 30 feet from me.
Yeah. And he was still, being a part of big moments. And, you think about the 2012 team, like maybe he wasn't the biggest star on that team, but he was by far the biggest power hitter that team had. Like people, I don't think remember 2012 Orioles were not built like the Orioles the next 5 or 6 years after that. That was not a team that was launching, 200 home runs a year as a team. Chris Davis was the power guy on that team. And then in 2016, yes, he took a step back in the first year of his contract, but he was still above a league average hitter. And he still hit 38 homers to help the Orioles get to the playoffs again that year. So he still had some big seasons. And, we obviously know that, I think people also kind of lump 2017 into, he was about a league average hitter that year. He still hit 26 homers. If he had finished out his career playing 3 or 4 seasons like that, it would have been a disappointing contract, but it wouldn't have been talked about obviously like it is now, because starting in 2018, he just became a hitter that you simply couldn't put on the field at times. But I do want to go back to, when things were good with Chris Davis. And, what I thought back to when this news was announced this morning was obviously the 2013 season. He finishes 3rd in MVP voting. He sets the Oriole record with 53 home runs. And I know that team was kind of disappointing coming off of 2012 and they did not make the postseason, but that summer, just continuously watching him hit homers seemingly every night was unbelievable. And, that's probably the best offensive season that we've seen from an Oriole in a really, really long time.
Yeah, no, his and you mentioned 2017. He hit 26 homers that year, and he also missed more than a month because of an oblique strain that season. So you're looking at a guy who, without a suspension, without an oblique strain, has 30 home runs 6 straight years. That's prolific, and he's arguably the most prolific power hitter the Orioles have ever had for an extended period. I mean, you look at Eddie Murray and Frank Robinson and Boog Powell and guys like that, and Palmeiro, but he's up there amongst those guys as the most prolific power hitters in the history of the Orioles. Back when he did in 2013, I just remember being at opening day, the home opener, and him hitting that grand slam to the opposite field the first pitch he sees. That was one of my all-time favorite moments from Chris Davis. What he did that year is something we've never seen in Baltimore. We may never see again. 53 home runs, 138 RBIs. He hits 286, finishes third in MVP voting. And really, if you look at that team should have been in the playoffs. Jim Johnson alone had 9 blown saves that season. They finished 6.5 games out of a wild card spot. If Jim Johnson only blows 3 saves, the Orioles are probably a playoff team that year, and who knows how far they can go. It stinks for Chris Davis that people talk about him and they say, yeah, well, his best years were on teams that didn't make the playoffs, because the worst team he was on in that 5-year run was still 81-81. The 2013 Orioles won 85 games, and like I said, just missed the playoffs. And it's just one of those situations where what was he supposed to do? He went out there and he did his job. Those 2 years, he led the majors in home runs. In 2013, led the majors in RBIs. He did his job. It's not his fault the pitching faltered in both of those seasons, and there were injuries and the like. It's just, I really wish that people would talk about him in the vein of, this is a guy who really helped this team get where it needed to go.
Yeah, and it'll always be tough that he just wasn't as big of a factor in the division-winning team than he could have been. With the injury, with the suspension, he was just the struggles, hitting under 200. He was benched for a little bit and then not being able to play in the postseason. And it could have been him in that Delman Young spot. He would have been in that lineup. Maybe you don't need to use Delman Young because you have, obviously Wieters, Machado too. But, if you have Chris Davis in that lineup, things could have gone differently. Things could have gone differently in Kansas City if Chris Davis is in that lineup too, even with the season he had. He did get to play in 2012 and pick up a few hits in the postseason, and obviously was in the wild card game in 16. But, it was a little unfortunate that he never got really any kind of postseason moment that we can remember. But I feel like even that 2013 season just makes up for it. And, the next question I want to ask is something I saw you tweeting about a little bit earlier today, is just, at what point, do you think it's now, even immediately after retirement, he hasn't played all year, at the end of the day, 5-10 years down the road, how much of the Chris Davis conversation is this rough stretch at the end, or how much, once we get well past the end of his career, is simply, the good times and the good years for him?
Well, it's an excellent question, because on the one hand, you can't ignore what he did for 5 years. And on the other hand, you can't ignore what he did for 5 years. You know what I mean? So do you remember Chris Davis as a guy who hit 280 and hit 200 home runs in 4 years? You remember him as a guy who hit 180 and hit, 80 home runs in 5 years. I'd like to believe that people will look back on him and see the contributions he made to a good baseball team for half a decade. But again, you can't ignore that he was arguably the worst position player in the history of baseball from 2017 through the day that he retired. You can't get away from that. And he was being paid an average salary of $21 million. Now, $17 million a year plus deferred money. But you can't ignore the fact that he was getting paid the most money in the history of the franchise to be the worst player maybe in the history of baseball. I think that the fans who are really downtrodden and really hurt by this franchise, and there's a lot of them, and really just think that this franchise is snake bitten and will never be good, they're going to remember the bad Chris Davis. And then guys like you and me who have sat through this and we know what's coming and we saw the good and we were willing to sit through the bad to get back to the good, we're going to look at him and we're going to say, hey, what he did can't be negated, and he was as big a piece of that run as anybody else. And that's how I choose to remember Chris Davis. And more importantly, what he did in the community. the $3 million to what was it? Was it St. Jude's, or it was something for child cancer? He donated $3 million. He was constantly donating money to this community and a member in the community, and that's maybe important than anything he ever did on the field. And for that alone, I think he's an Orioles Hall of Famer, just because he was such a vital part of this community for such a long time.
Yeah, that's always my pushback on, like, oh, he took his $160 million and just stopped playing. Like, he used that money that he got to do some good in Baltimore, in the state of Maryland. Like, he didn't have to do that. And the other thing is, like, this has become his second home. Obviously, he's been with the Orioles since 2011, but he grew up in Texas. He was drafted by the Rangers. He made his debut with the Texas Rangers. He could have just, packed it up, shifted back to Texas and said, that's it. I'm done with this area. But that wasn't what he did either, which will always be a big plus on his legacy. And the way I think I'm going to end up thinking about it as well is, like, yeah, you can nitpick about, when he was best, according to what the Orioles record was, but the fall of Chris Davis, when it really started to get bad, coincided kind of with the fall of the Orioles. Like, the last month of, that September of 2017, when we all realized that team wasn't going to go anywhere and things really fell apart. Chris Davis, kind of was falling apart too, went right into 2018 when things were just a disaster. And, these last 4 seasons, there's not a lot of players from this era that, came and went that you're going to remember. Obviously the John Means and the Mancinis and the Mullins are always going to be a big part of the Orioles, but you're going to try to forget these years no matter what. So the fact that Chris Davis's awful plate appearances and awful time at the plate came in these years, I think makes it a lot easier to forget them. And instead, when I'm the Orioles baseball in the 2010s, I'm only remembering 2012 through 16. Well, hey, Chris Davis had some pretty damn productive years in that time. And I think for me, that's where it kind of makes it a lot easier to at least look back on the positive moments. But I did, before we get into, like, specifically talking a little bit about our favorite Chris Davis moments before we go, I did just want to talk a little bit about the salary piece, because it obviously is, not the biggest part of this, but it's important here for the Orioles, because Chris Davis was really the only guy with guaranteed money going into 2022 on this Orioles roster. I mean, it's crazy as that is to say. Obviously, there's plenty of players who are going to arbitration, so technically their money isn't guaranteed, but they will be getting contracts next year. We just don't know what it is. But Davis was owed that $17 million. And there were some real confusing reports for about an hour there about what exactly was going to happen with Chris Davis's money. I actually think Dan Connolly at The Athletic did the best job of kind of clearing things up for people. But he basically said, this is reading from one of his tweets earlier, just to make things clear on the Davis salary, because apparently some are confused. Davis will get what's remaining of his contract. So he's going to get all the money, but next year's $17 million, which was supposed to be the $17 million on the books for 2022, will instead be deferred over the next few years. So the Orioles won't have to pay, just the $17 million all in next year's, basically salary cap, although there's not one in baseball. Their payroll won't be hit $17 million next year, but he's still going to get paid through 2037, and Chris Davis Day will live on beyond Bobby Bonilla Day. But it seems like Chris, at least from reports from Dan Connolly, who also reported on the hip thing being a big factor in this decision by Chris Davis, he also reported from sources that Davis, after, kind of deciding this, had gone to the Orioles and talked about making that restructure. I think that's also a positive for him going out as well. And, it does give the Orioles just a little bit of flexibility, because this offseason is the first time where Michael Elias can sit down and say, we might want to start spending not on the giant splash free agent, but start spending on some guys for 2022.
Right. The first thing I thought about when I saw that he retired was the contract and the relief that the Orioles are going to get. And it seems like it's going to be paid out over the next 3 years. So probably close to $6 million each of the next 3 years on the books for the Orioles, which is a hell of a lot better than $17 million, right? And I immediately started thinking, well, if they're not paying the full $17 million, are they now going to go out and spend money on free agents? I still don't think that they're that they're to that point of this rebuild yet where they're going to be doing that. I do expect them to go out and maybe get some better starting pitchers than what they've tried to get the last couple of years. But if you're hoping for Corey Seager or Trevor Story or Chris Bryant out of this, you're going to have a really, really sad Christmas, because that's just not going to happen. It's nice that, and I think it's important for people to realize that just because Chris Davis was really bad at baseball for a good bit of time doesn't mean that he's a bad person, and this is just one of those things where I have no doubts that he went to the Orioles and he's like, look, my hip's not responding the way I wanted it to. I think I'm done. But I don't want to hurt you guys, especially if I'm not playing. So let's work something out so that let's come to a scenario that works best for both sides. I have no doubts in my mind that Chris Davis did that. The Orioles were willing to listen with an open mind. And that's how they were able to get something like this done. I do hope that it means that they'll spend a little bit more this coming off season, just because we can't, I don't know about you, Connor, but I can't look at this team and watch them lose 100 games again next year. It's embarrassing. It's painful if you put your heart and soul in this like we do. I can't watch it after this year. So I hope that they go out there and they use some of that money that they save on Chris Davis and do it to get some, especially because Adley's going to be here next year, right? And you've got to get pieces on this team to build around a player like that, whose clock is going to start at some point. You got to build around him. And I can't imagine him being on a Baltimore roster that you aren't building to compete.
Yeah, I got to say, one of the reasons, there's plenty of reasons why Mike Elias is not going to call up Adley Rutschman this year. One of them being, do you really want Adley's first taste of the big leagues to be this roster? I mean, right. At least in the offseason, let's say, they were supposed to pay Chris Davis 17. They're only paying him $6 million. So let's say they have 11 million freed up. At the very least, let's hope this at least, and obviously they should be spending more than that 11 million more to make this team at least watchable next year. But let's say they just literally do the 11 million. You can get a quality baseball player for $11 million a year, a quality starting pitcher who's really going to help your team be a lot better. And if you can maybe instead, say I want to sign 2 players, for $6 million a year each, like that's still going to be players better than you're putting on the field right now. And you look at it, not just Adley, Grayson's going to be up here next year. The guys in AAA are probably going to be up here next year. Like probably DL Hall is going to be up at some point next year. You want them to come in and at least have some veterans around them and a team that's winning some more baseball games. And I don't think the Orioles are going to finish 500 or better next year, but your goal should be to win maybe 75 games in 2022 and then try to get back to a winning team the year after. And I think that money should at least help. And again, worst case scenario here is the Orioles say, we've saved 11 million. Now we can pocket that 11 million. If that happens, then it's just even worse than things are getting now. But you hope at the very least they use that exact 11 million and maybe even more. They say, hey, we were going to spend even with Chris Davis on the books. Now we can spend a little bit more and start to make this team look a little better. So we will get right back to our Chris Davis conversation with Paul Valley of the Bat Around in just a second. But first, got to tell you about betonline.ag, the fastest and easiest way to bet on all your sports action. Now, we've got baseball season in full swing, and you can track all the action over at betonline.ag. Hey, if you had bet on Chris Davis retiring before the end of the 2021 season, you would have cashed in this one today. But it's not just baseball. You can get all the latest news, odds, and info for all your sporting needs, including UFC and MMA action. And how about the NFL as the season starts sooner than you think? So don't sit on the sidelines anymore. This is your chance to get into the game. Head to the website or use your mobile device to sign up today, and you can receive a 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit when you use the promo code LOCKEDON. Again, that's promo code Locked On to receive a 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit at betonline.ag, your online sportsbook experts. And today's episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast is also brought to you by Wild Alaskan Company. Now, you're used to having a lot of choices when it comes to what you eat, but it matters where your food comes from. Get your nutrition from nature. The Wild Alaskan Company sources wild-caught seafood from Alaska and the Pacific Northwest. They deliver high-quality, sustainably sourced wild-caught seafood right to your door. You can choose from salmon, whitefish, or a combination. And every month, there are different specials to explore. And each shipment contains premium, wild-caught, individually wrapped portions of delicious seafood that's ready to prepare and super easy to cook. And you can adjust, pause, or even cancel your membership at any time as well. So right now, head over to wildalaskancompany.com/MLB and you'll get $15 off your first box of premium seafood. Again, that's wildalaskancompany.com/MLB for $15 off your first box. One more time, that's wildalaskancompany.com/MLB. Make sure to use our URL to let them know that we sent you. And now back to our Chris Davis retirement conversation with Paul Valley, the host of the Bat Around. Before we wrap up, I did want to just go back and forth with a couple of top Chris Davis memories, because I know things were bad the last 3 or 4 years, but man, did he have some awesome moments in an Oriole uniform before that. So I'm going to give you the floor first. Just one moment that pops in your mind first when you're thinking of best Chris Davis moments as an Oriole.
Oh man, honestly, there's a lot of them. But I'm going to go, I guess I'm going to do kind of a top 5. And for me, the 5th moment would be his entire month of September in 2012. Had over 900 OPS. He hit 10 home runs. He was the heart and soul of that offense in September that really helped them make that huge playoff push to get them into that wild card and make the playoffs for the first time in 15 years. You can't ignore what Chris Davis did offensively in September of 2012. For me, that's a huge moment because it put the Orioles over the top that season.
Yeah, that's I mean, a great one. And again, that's the thing about 2012. Like, he was kind of the guy. And I know Mark Reynolds turned into Barry Bonds for 2 weeks there in September of that year, but Chris Davis was kind of the more consistent power hitter that season, because Hardy didn't hit as well as he did in 2011. Mark Reynolds didn't hit as well as he did in 2011. And obviously you got a lot of production from Adam Jones, but Chris Davis was the home run guy that year. And he only hit 33. It was a different brand of baseball, 9 years ago as well, but he was huge on that team. And, I don't know if you're going to bring this up, but just to kind of expand on 2012 Chris Davis, Buck Showalter put him out in right field after Nick Markakis got injured, and it worked. Like, he was not Nick Markakis, but nobody expected him to be Nick Markakis defensively. But the Orioles didn't lose so much where you were scared when a ball was hit out to right field. Now, again, they used guys like Endy Chavez and others as defensive replacements late in the games, but he was solid out there and he did what he needed to do to help the team.
Well, this was back before it looked like Chris Davis was consistently running in mud, when he was still in his mid-20s and he was athletic, had some sneaky speed out there, made a few diving plays. He caught every ball that he got to, right? He had a solid enough arm to not hurt you out there, especially in right field. You can't understate that he wasn't great. He wasn't a gold glover out there, but he did not hurt you. And you can't understate that, because when you lose a guy like Nick Markakis, who's probably the clubhouse leader because of the quiet leader, because of what he does offensively and defensively, you lose him for the rest of the season. And you don't really, I'm not going to say you don't miss a beat, but you're not hindered by putting Chris Davis out there. I thought that was huge. And that was a sticking point for Scott Boras when he's trying to get Chris Davis that next contract was, look, he can play anywhere on the field. He can play first, he can play third, he can play corner outfield, and he's not going to hurt you. So I don't think you can understate that at all.
What's your number 4 on your list?
For me, because I was at this game, I was actually at number 4 and number 3 for me. Number 4 walk-off home run against the White Sox. They were playing Chris Sale that game. They actually, I think they got 11 hits and 5 runs off of Chris Sale in that game. I was sitting out there. I was at that game with my dad and one of my best friends, and Davis didn't start. And he comes off the bench. And it's so funny because my dad's the eternal pessimist. He's like a typical Baltimore pessimistic fan, right? And so we're sitting there, and literally every single batter that came up for the Orioles that game, I'm not joking, it was every single batter. He said, he's going to strike out. So sure enough, Chris Davis comes up hitting 190, and my dad goes, he's going to strike out. And he hits a walk-off home run that lands 30 feet to the left of my dad. It was absolutely amazing, a huge win over a really tough pitcher and a team that was actually pretty good back then. For me, that walk-off home run in 2014 was a big moment of Chris Davis's.
Yeah, that was a big moment. And you know what's really interesting about that moment? I think a lot of Orioles fans forget who he was pinch hitting for. He pinch hit for Delman Young, who was, of course, the Orioles' clutch hero later in that season. And Buck Showalter went away from him in the clutch to go to Chris Davis, and it worked out. But what was number 3 on that list?
Number 3 is the walk-off home run on opening day in 2013. Not the walk-off home run, the grand slam on opening day in 2013 against the Twins, because he had just had that big opening series where he was just dropping bombs left and right. And when he hit that grand slam, you sat there and you thought, man, this is something special, because like what he's going to do this year is something special. He was so locked in from beginning to end of that season. He had 37 home runs in the first half of the season and before the All-Star break. He was just so locked in that was when I was really like, this is going to be a special season for this guy. And it was in the home opener against the Twins, just a huge moment in that game. For me, that moment that's going to be etched in my memory for the rest of my life.
Yeah, and that's what honestly one of my favorite parts about Chris Davis as a whole, watching his career, just the opposite field power he had. He hit that ball the other way in the left field on that grand slam. Just the ability to just kind of flick his wrists, hit the ball the other way, and he used Camden Yards to his advantage. Obviously, it's a nice park to hit in for righties down the line, but he almost hit in it like a righty at times. He would just flick that ball out to left field and get it 3, 4, 5 rows into the left field seats, and it worked for him a lot. And that was another one of those moments.
Oh, absolutely. And that's just something, and that's actually going to lead me to my number 2 moment. And this isn't anything specifically special. It was just a random game in 2016 again. I believe it was against the Cleveland Indians. And it was because of that Oppo Taco power, man. He got a pitch up in the zone on the outer half of the plate, probably about letters high. And he just perfect swing on it. He hit an opposite field home run that went 443 feet. 443 feet to the opposite field to left center. It was one of the most impressive opposite field home runs I've ever seen in my entire life. When I saw where that ball landed, I said, oh my God, that's stupid power. And to see somebody do that, yeah, it's the Orioles ended up winning that game. It may have been the same game that Nolan Reimold hit the walk-off home run, but I'm not sure. But just seeing him hit that home run and seeing what he did with that strength, it was such a feat of strength and hitting prowess that it's just forever etched in my mind. Because who hits opposite field home runs 443 feet? It's insane.
Yeah, I mean, he did it like so much. Obviously, not all of them were to that level of distance to left field, but just that opposite field power was really unlike anything else. So then, what takes number 1 on your list?
So actually, I have a tie for number 1 because they were both so important and they stick out to just about everybody. One is or I guess we'll say my 1 and then my 1A. So my 1 is obviously the pitching performance in Boston, the 2 innings pitch to pick up the win in relief. A lot of people may not remember Davis went 0 for 7 with 5 strikeouts at the plate that game, and then comes in, he strikes out Adrian Gonzalez, who was one of the best hitters in the game at that point. You have that double off the wall. Darnell McDonald gets thrown out at the plate on an excellent relay from Jones to Hardy to Wieters. I remember Wieters tagging him and then showing the umpire the ball. And Davis was a pitcher on the mound when that happened to save the game and ended up leading the Orioles to the victory. And then there's the double in game 162 of 2011. And honestly, that game is what catapulted the Orioles back into prominence and back into relevance. That they have nothing to play for, right? The Red Sox are, if the Red Sox win, they're in the playoffs. They win, they're in. The Orioles are losing. It's the bottom of the 9th inning. Reimold's on second base, and Davis just pokes this double into right center field and scores Reimold. And you're just sitting there and you're like jumping up and down. It feels like the playoffs. I remember I had to finish a 26-page short story that night, and it's 11 o'clock. There had been a rain delay. I'm watching this game, and I'm like, screw this story that I have to write that I got an A on, by the way. I'm like, screw this story. I need to watch this game. And it meant literally nothing for the Orioles except that it catapulted them into that 2012 magical season. And for me, Chris Davis being at the forefront of that with that game-tying RBI double was absolutely phenomenal. It was just incredible.
Yeah, he started that rally and obviously the pitching performance in Boston. I mean, it's.
And I think I misspoke. Davis had the double that Reimold drove him in.
Yeah,
right. Yeah, that's what it was. Davis doubled, Reimold drove him in, and then Andino drove in Reimold. But Davis got that whole rally started.
Yeah, and you know, it's so funny that the other thing is the pitching, because that's my top moment as well. And it's so funny to have a guy who hit 253 home runs for the Orioles, hit 53 in one season to set the franchise record. And we all kind of first think of him throwing 2 innings in the 16th and 17th at Fenway Park to win a game on what was obviously an extremely special team in 2012. I do want to shout out a couple more before we go. The walk-off he had against the athletic switch pitcher a couple years ago, Pat Vendetti. I mean, he hit a ball that was almost in the dirt. He was leaning over. He had one hand on the bat and somehow pulled it into right center field for a walk-off homer. That was probably the most impressive home run I saw Chris Davis hit, just because of where he hit it from, what his body looked like when he hit it. And just, that was literally just arm strength to get that ball out of the ballpark. Like, not just to get a base hit there.
That pitch was like an inch off the ground and he hit it out.
And the other one was one that was talked about today on Twitter is the 11th inning home run he hit where he hit the walk-off against Tampa and he woke up the fan who was sleeping across seats in right center field. The ball lands like 2 feet away from him and he pops up out of the seats, which is just a fantastic moment. And then in 2012, when Nate McLouth hits the walk-off off the wall, and Chris Davis is the first out of the dugout to literally pick up Nate McLouth, sling him over his shoulder, and run around the infield at Camden Yards. I mean, that's just a lasting image of Chris Davis as well. And, it's fun to obviously remember those top moments. And again, just interesting and kind of shocking as we record here on Thursday afternoon that he did retire this morning. But Paul, thank you so much for joining me to kind of, recap the career of Chris Davis, what happens with him, what happens with the money, and then just kind of a nice look back at his career, especially at the good times. And this is going to be talked about for a while by Orioles fans, especially before the Orioles get good again, because it's just going to be a lot of talk about, what is the legacy of Chris Davis. And I'm hoping at the end of the day, like we talked about, it turns out to be the positive stuff takes precedence, because he was one of the best hitters in the American League for a bit there with the Orioles. Oh,
absolutely. And it's funny you mentioned it, because for my show on Saturday, as soon as he announced the retirement, I started making plans to switch segments around, because I already had my Orioles banter segment figured out. And now I have to add another segment to it just to talk about Chris Davis. So definitely something that needs to be talked about. And I do think that he's a future Orioles Hall of Famer for the Orioles, not Cooperstown. But that remains to be seen. We'll see what happens. But thank you so much for having me on, man. It was a lot of fun. I love talking baseball. Even if it is Chris Davis, I enjoy it. So thank you.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see if they do put him in the Orioles Hall of Fame, what that whole situation looks like. But again, you can check out Paul talking about Chris Davis again this Saturday morning, 10 a.m. to 12 over at Press Box. The host of The Bat Around, him and Zach Goodman, I'm sure will get into a lot of Chris Davis talk.
But back to the guys who are still on the current Orioles, just quickly here before we wrap up. O's set to start a 3-game series with the Boston Red Sox this weekend, a team that the Orioles have not played here in a while. It's a 3-game series, Friday, Saturday, Sunday this weekend at Fenway Park. Boston comes in 66-50. They sit in second place in the AL East behind the Tampa Bay Rays. At the moment, they are 4 games back. And, it's been kind of a back-and-forth season series so far. The two teams, the Orioles and the Red Sox, have played 10 times. Red Sox have won 6 of the 10 so far this season. Of course, the Orioles swept the Sox to open the year at Fenway Park, and they're going to look to do that again. But again, these two teams took a long break in the schedule since playing each other. The last game between the two was Monday, May 10th in Baltimore. That is the last time the two teams played, and they will match up again here on Friday, August the 13th. But we do have the pitching matchups for you between the two teams that were just released here on Thursday evening. In tonight's Game 1, it will be Nick Pivetta going for the Red Sox. Spencer Watkins will start for the Orioles. In Saturday's Game 2, it's the big one. Chris Sale making his return from the injured list. He will pitch for the Red Sox for the first time since 2019, coming back from Tommy John surgery. He will go up against Jorge Lopez, who starts for the Orioles. And then Sunday, it's the former Orioles prospect Eduardo Rodriguez, who will start for the Red Sox. Orioles listing TBD, but as I talked about on yesterday's episode, Bruce Zimmerman, who made his last rehab start in Norfolk on Tuesday, would be on regular rest to go on Sunday. And I think that's the reason why it's TBD. The plan should be for Zimmerman to be activated on Sunday and start the Sunday game in Boston, but we will see if that is the case. And then here on the pod, we'll be back with you on Monday, recapping the 3-game series at Fenway Park, getting you the 3 big takeaways for the Orioles from the weekend. And then we'll get you ready for a series at the Trop starting Monday night for the Orioles against the Rays. But again, that is all coming up on Monday, when I'm sure we'll have more to say as well about the Chris Davis retirement. But until then, I'm Connor Newcomb, and this has been the Locked On Orioles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
The Tim Tebow experiment ends before it really begins. Here's what our local experts are locked on today. All-star NBA center Joel Embiid has signed a $196 million extension with the Philadelphia 76ers. Listen to Locked On NBA today for more on the NBA's schedule release, who will play on Christmas Day. the Jacksonville Jaguars have waived tight end Tim Tebow. Find out why the Tim Tebow experiment ended today on Locked On Jaguars with local expert Tony Wiggins. Today on Locked On Today, host Peter Bukowski continues his look around the NFL in anticipation of the NFL season. Listen for previews of the Rams, Giants, and Bengals. Subscribe to the Locked On NFL podcast on YouTube and tune in tonight beginning at 9 p.m. Eastern for a fantasy football preview from the Locked On Fantasy Football podcast and the Locked On Dynasty Football podcast. Local experts on the biggest stories. It's the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.